Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into a fascinating and profound tension between the ancient philosophy of connection and the crushing reality of our modern isolation. We are going on a deeply analytical journey, exploring the massive friction between classical Greek thought and New Testament theology to really figure out how we relate to one another. We live in an era of hyperconnectivity, yet we are drowning in an epidemic of loneliness. It's wild, right? We're constantly collecting online friends like digital trading cards, smashing that like button on curated milestones, while feeling increasingly isolated behind our screens. To understand why all this digital networking leaves us feeling so empty, we have to plunge into a rigorous taxonomy of relational ethics. We need to look at the very architecture of how human beings bond. Section 1. The Triadic Architecture. Aristotle's Taxonomy of Friendship. To understand this, we need to begin our dialectical descent in classical Greece. Long before algorithms engineered our social lives, Aristotle actually cracked the code on human connection in his Nicomachean Ethics. He recognized that friendship isn't just a passive luxury, it's the absolute cement of any community. So he mapped out 3 distinct tiers based on their teleological drivers, the why behind the connection: utility, pleasure, and virtue.
First up, friendships of utility. These are purely transactional. Basically, they're business contracts masquerading as social bonds. Think about your standard online networking. You're asking, what can I gain? And there's no malice here, but these bonds are incredibly short-lived. The absolute second the mutual benefit dries up, poof, the friendship vanishes.
Then you have friendships of pleasure. These are fueled by immediate gratification, like a shared hobby, a mutual interest, or just hanging out to have fun. But just like utility, they are entirely situational. Human tastes evolve, so if you change your interests or move into a season of life where you're no longer the fun one, these friendships tend to just quietly drift away.
That brings us to Section 2, the psychological mirror, the internal topography of the soul.
Now, if we want to reach that highest tier, perfect friendship, we have to radically slow down and examine the psychological anchors it demands. Aristotle argues that true friendship isn't a fleeting emotion. It requires a hexis. That's an active, enduring moral state or an acquired disposition of character. It requires immense time, shared history, and tested character to build a permanent structure that survives distance and hardship.
And this permanence, it actually starts within yourself, with a concept called philotia. Now, we aren't talking about vulgar selfishness or chasing wealth. This is noble self-love. It's the rigorous, disciplined pursuit of character excellence. Basically, you have to possess genuine goodness within yourself before you can even begin to share it with someone else. Once you have that, it gives rise to finding an allos autos, literally, another self. This is a virtuous companion who objectively reflects your truest self back to you. It's a moral mirror. Because it's nearly impossible to see our own blind spots, a true friend calls you out on your nonsense and pushes you toward your absolute highest potential, entirely out of genuine love.
But all of this brings us to a really profound philosophical collision. Think about it. Does true friendship actually require moral perfection? What happens when we face a lack of shared virtue, or when the people involved just aren't equals? What room is there for the broken, the flawed, or the struggling?
Let's look at Section 3, the aristocratic limit, where the classical framework breaks down.
Here's the catch with Aristotle's brilliant architecture. It isn't aristocratic exclusivity, strictly built for morally equal elites. It operates on a very rigid, proportional calculus of honor and shame. It's inherently centripetal, meaning it only draws inward toward pre-existing equals. So by definition, this framework explicitly excludes the unvirtuous, the marginalized, and the socially destitute. It requires mutual moral symmetry just to survive. But history gives us a fascinating disruption to this elite calculus in the Old Testament. Aristotle demands that in an unequal relationship, the inferior person must render greater honor to maintain balance. Yet we see Crown Prince Jonathan completely shattering this dynamic. He loves David, a lowly shepherd, as his own soul. He doesn't demand honor, he literally hands over his royal armor, willfully embracing personal diminishment so his socially inferior friend can be elevated. Which leads into Section 4, the redemptive subversion, shattering the meritocracy with grace.
This Old Testament narrative sets the stage for New Testament theology to totally subvert classical ethics. Enter agape. Agape is a fundamentally centrifugal, covenantal, and redemptive love. Instead of drawing inward, it pours outward.
It actively condescends to the marginalized, the broken, and even the enemy, completely bypassing the need for any pre-existing moral symmetry.
So you literally have grace shattering the Greek meritocracy here. Where Aristotle relies on shared status and meritocratic virtue, Christian agape relies on imputed righteousness and self-sacrificial grace. Where the classical model aims for imminent earthly flourishing, this new framework aims for transcendent glory and redemptive communion. It replaces elite symmetry with radical hospitality.
And the worldview clash here is absolute. Aristotle explicitly stated that friendship with a slave is impossible, because a slave is merely an animate tool, there's nothing in common. But then you have the Apostle Paul commanding Philemon to receive his runaway slave no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother. It completely upends the classical social hierarchy, declaring that in this new community, tools become brothers.
Later, early church fathers like Augustine pointed out the ultimate flaw in the classical mirror. Augustine learned through the tragic death of a close friend that if you elevate a human being to the ultimate anchor of your soul, loving them purely as another self, without anchoring that love in God, it inevitably leads to relational idolatry. And when that fragile human bond breaks, you're left with absolute existential despair.
So how do we navigate our modern relational landscape with all of this in mind? To cure our digital loneliness epidemic, we really need to audit our networks and stop treating connection as a mere currency. We need to actively elevate our utility bonds into high accountability moral mirrors. But crucially, we must guard against forming insular elite cliques. We have to extend Christ-like hospitality and grace rather than just demanding moral perfection from everyone around us.
This completely redefines the ultimate proof of friendship. It's no longer about achieving some aristocratic honor. As John 15:13 says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Christ shifts the absolute measure of love to a willing, cross-shaped act of self-giving service to redeem the other.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a profound question to evaluate the ultimate anchor of your own relationships. Will you settle for the transactional, hyper-individualistic black mirror of modern utility, or will you choose to lay down your life for a radically redemptive friendship? The architecture of your connections will ultimately define the architecture of your life. Thanks so much for diving into the deep end with me today.